My name is Hadley Gamble. I am the Chief International Anchor for LRBA, as well as a columnist and writer for Semaphore Global. It's a pleasure to welcome you all here today, as well as our distinguished panelists. We're going to be shining the spotlight on the Red Sea. His Excellency, the President of the Leadership Council of Yemen, Rashad Al-Alimi. Joni Ernst, she, of course, is Senator from the United States. And Annette, of course, she is the Special Representative for the Horn of Africa for the EU. Panelists, welcome. I want to kick off by asking His Excellency to just walk us through how he sees what's happening today in his country. Speaking to U.S. officials on the sidelines of this forum, I've heard various plans for the future of Yemen, one of which is to, quote, bomb the hell out of them. How do you respond, sir?
Thank you very much, first of all. A big thank you to all the participants of this panel. Thank you for attending the Spotlight session. It's a real pleasure to me to be together with you today to pinpoint some aspects about what Yemen has to endure currently in terms of negative repercussions at all levels, which doesn't really come as a surprise to us against the background of what has been happening and against the background of the Houthi campaigns that, of course, affect naval security and the freedom of navigation in the Red Sea. There has been a long-standing Iranian investment contributing to this Houthi campaign we are witnessing today for around 30 years now, maybe more than that, in terms of arming this terrorist group and making them capable of launching such terrorist attacks. And based upon that, we assess different aspects, of course, the huge damage that has been caused so far as a result of those terrorist attacks, the tragedy, the human tragedies the Yemeni people are enduring up until today as we speak. More than 13 people living under the poverty line, more than half of the population of Yemen, which means that we have been witnessing an exacerbation of the situation and of the catastrophe as such. And this, of course, adds to all the pains, all the painful things that Yemen has been going through over the past years and decades. But, of course, we have to raise our voices high and ask the international community to stand by us and to announce the Houthis as a terrorist group. And we look forward to being part of the international community and to receiving support as the Yemeni government in order to regain our authority and regain control of certain parts of the country.
That you're looking for from the President of the United States?
We look to retrieve control, retrieve authority over the Yemeni country in order to be able to restore peace and stability to the region and to the entire world. Of course, we have allies under the leadership of Saudi Arabia. We have partners and friends within the free community, the free international community of this free world. And this support will hopefully be conducive to supporting the Yemeni government in order to overcome the hardships at the economic level. we are going through in order to retrieve control, of course, retrieve our authority and restore peace and stability to the region, within the region, and within the entire world. I think the step that has been made as regards the announcement of the Houthis as a terrorist group has been a step in the right direction, and we would like more countries to join, to follow that lead, and try to cut off the support channels that lead up to arming the Houthis through Yemen and through other areas, of course, through Iran and through other areas. Another step in the right direction would be as follows, as said, supporting the Yemeni government. The Yemeni government is capable of putting an end to this threat, because the threat is first and foremost coming from the land, not from the air, not from the seas, the waters. Even though, of course, drones are being launched, etc. And we are witnessing a situation now where as navigation and where we have naval choke points everywhere.
And you look at how the Israeli military has dealt with Hamas and Hezbollah with U.S. weapons. Is that what you would like to see happen to the Houthis in your country?
We believe that the Houthis are to be classified as a terrorist group practicing terrorist actions and operations comparable to those done by Al-Qaeda and Daesh and the ISIS. It is the first time we witness a terrorist group that is capable of launching missiles and launching flying drones that cause damage to economic ships, to to international navigation. Therefore, we have to attribute the level of threats that they deserve to them. We have to support the Yemeni people in order to make it able to live in peace and security with its neighbors and within this world.
Freedom of the seas, and that's something that the Biden administration in 4 years failed to ensure, freedom of navigation and freedom of the seas in the Red Sea. Senator, in your mind, what can we expect from this government going forward?
Well, and thank you, Hadley, and I'm glad to have this forum. You are absolutely correct. In the last administration, we saw an absolute failure by the president to lead on this issue. And traveling through the Middle East so many times, in sitting down in various discussions with Arab leaders, they continually asked, where is American leadership? So we have seen that era go away, which is fine. We have a new era of leadership in the United States of America. Under President Joe Biden, we saw the Houthis that were designated as a foreign terrorist organization have that designation taken away. Eventually, with the continued attacks by the Houthis, we saw the Joe Biden administration then redesignate them as a specially designated terrorist group, which doesn't have the full weight of being a foreign terrorist organization. So right away, new administration with President Trump, the Houthis are now redesignated as a foreign terrorist organization. So there are stronger economic pushes that we can put against them, the diplomatic pressure that can be exerted against them. That's just one step. But now we see the ability, and we've seen it before with President Trump under Trump 45, now Trump 47, where he will go after those that strike us, strike our friends. We have seen it before. We will see it again. But not only is President Trump just acting unilaterally, we've heard this from two of the previous Central Command commanders. We've seen it under Joe Votel, and we've heard from Frank McKenzie, that we can go after targets that the Houthis use. We can go offensively against navigation sites, radar sites, and we can target those and make the Houthis less effective. But most certainly we will target the Houthi leadership and take them out. So another step as well in the United States, things that we can do, providing leadership in this area, things like My Defend Act, which was focused on the Middle East, where we allow for integrated air and missile defense systems. It was used quite effectively when Iran targeted Israel last April, where we had Arab nations coming together to take down those missiles, those drones. Similar situation can be used here. The Maritime Act, which we have just passed as well, allows for greater ISR capability to spot these types of activities at sea, particularly the Houthis in the Red Sea, and allow greater capabilities pulled together, operating under one intelligence picture. So there are so many ways that the United States can lead, and we will lead. The Houthis are a scourge, not just for Yemen, but all around the globe. So I'm glad to be here. Hope to get into more of the discussion on the impact of the Houthis when it comes to the economy, navigation, and trade. But it is something that finally I feel we can target. I'll leave you with this as we talk about the Houthis in particular, that just had a conversation with General Kurilla, the current Central Command commander. And of all of the issues facing the Middle East today, he has stated that the biggest issue he has is the Houthis. It is metastasizing, and if we do not do something about them, they will continue to be a problem for decades to come.
Do you anticipate that the Trump administration will move quickly to decimate the Houthis in the same way that we've seen Hamas and Hezbollah decimated?
I certainly hope so. I do believe it will be a priority. But, of course, we see a pivot to the Indo-Pacific, so we will need to continue pressing the president on this issue.
When you think about this from a European perspective, one of the things that's come up in the last several days, and it's been many months in the offing, is Russian movement to secure a foothold. They've been ousted from their Syrian foothold, and, of course, being Russian, they have decided to move in where they can. How dangerous is this in your mind?
Let me start why the Red Sea is so key to us, not just for freedom of navigation. I mean, more than 20% of our trade to Asia is going through it. Underwater connectivity is going through it. And, of course, also green hydrogen is going through it. So for us, really, it is key. It's a nexus. It's not just geopolitically important, but it really is a survival question. It's not just... You know, the question on Russia, I will come to this, but I think what we see right now is a disruption where we see the Horn of Africa suffering. But of course, there's also a connection that we do need to basically start cutting, and that is the connection between the Houthis and Al-Shabaab and Daesh. And I think we've seen, you know, Daesh quadrupling in Puntland in northern Somalia. We see Al-Shabaab after 17 years of an AU mission not really pulling out, and we know their capabilities in terms of drones, flying drones, but also operating drones and building drones is rising. So only working on Yemen is not going to cut it. And I think when we look at Russia, we just spoke to the Sudanese in Port Sudan yesterday. You know, the foreign minister just came back from Moscow, where he wasn't fully clear if they have signed an agreement for the Russians to now use a naval base in Port Sudan or north of Port Sudan, or if the signing is to come. But of course, I mean, for us, this is quite a red flag, and we made this very clear to Sudan. And I think this is where, you know, that's the second part. So we have Al-Shabaab, we have Daesh in Puntland, but of course we have the war in Sudan, and both parties not only working with Russia, but both parties also trying to get closer to basically the Red Sea. And this right now, having this war, is the opposite of the security and stability that we need in the Red Sea. And therefore, our engagement, not just with Aspides, with our operation, but also the engagement with the countries on both sides of the shore, with the GCC, with of course, the Horn of African countries, with Egypt, that is key to us, because we do believe that it has to come from the region. And of course, we also have to see our interests, not just with Aspides, but also long-term engagement, because neither Al-Shabaab nor Daesh are going away with engagement only on the sea.
You mentioned the GCC countries, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, have tried it all before in Yemen. They didn't find success in spite of being aided by the Americans over subsequent efforts. And to your mind, what kind of joint effort needs to come together? Because it has to, as you say, involve the GCC, but also the United States and Europe.
I mean, my mandate is more on the Horn side, so I think they're part of the problem, but they're also the worst hit. I mean, if you look at the African side, I mean, the economy in Egypt is hit 60% of the Suez. Djibouti, 80% of transshipment is down. A country like Djibouti, who's living basically on transshipment, can hardly survive that. And I think this is where we see even more of a problem coming that is not yet triggered. Therefore, we do need much more of a cooperative engagement, not just on the Houthis, but having a joint understanding what a security architecture in the Red Sea could look like, and what does it take? What does it take in terms of on land, but also what does it take on the sea?
And Senator, to that point, I mean, when we talk about U.S. resources and how they continue to be stretched, particularly when we talk about new theaters, well, the theater in Asia, I'm told on pretty good authority that if we were to be engaged in an Asia-Pacific, we do not have enough tonnage to sustain a long-term fight there. In your mind, how stretched is the U.S. at this point? Are we stretched too far for freedom of navigation in the Red Sea?
Well, we'll say we are stretched. I will admit that, with the focus now on China and the lack of the size fleet that we feel we should have as the United States of America. But this is why we have to look at other resources. So don't just think about a carrier group. Think about other ways that we can invest. And Task Force 59, which is located with NAVCENT, they do a lot of research on ways that we can monitor what's going on in the Red Sea. Think autonomous vehicles, other types of platforms that we can use at a much lower cost. And then things like the Maven Smart project, which allows us to use technology and computing to identify targets quickly. So we have to think a little bit out of the box and not just traditional conventional warfare or defensive mechanisms. We have to think differently in a modern era. So when we have limited resources, we have to think differently. We have to utilize technology a lot more than we have perhaps in the past. So I do think that will be an important part of combating against the Houthis in the Red Sea. But when we go back to the collaboration that we have with our friends and allies, we do have Operation Prosperity Guardian, which is 20 countries that have come together to safeguard the Red Sea. It is much more of a defensive posture, though. So we also have Operation Poseidon Archer, which is more of an offensive structure, posture. So all of these things combined, I would say they're just duct tape, though. Okay, they're just duct tape. We're treating the symptoms, okay, the Houthis in the Red Sea. But how do we get to a point where we're actually starving out the Houthis? And that starts with Iran. Okay, so they are the ones that are feeding the funds to the Houthis. They are the ones that are directing the missiles to the Houthis. We talk about Al-Shabaab and what they are doing in coordination. We talk about Hezbollah, who has also been used out of Lebanon to train the Houthis. So all of these are connected back to Iran. So what do we need to do? We need to make sure that if we have sanctions against Iran, that we are actually enforcing the sanctions against Iran. I also have a piece of legislation that is the Iranian Enforcement Act, the Iranian Sanctions Enforcement Act, which would be a self-funding activity that would really choke out Iran. The problem is we have so many countries that won't honor those sanctions. So we've got to do better. We've got to go to the point where it really matters, and that is getting at Iran.
Yeah. Mr. President, just to weigh in on this, if you would, to the Senator's point, who's funding all of this? And that, of course, is Iran. In your mind, what needs to be done specifically to keep the Houthis from being reinforced in that way?
I do think that what the Senator has said about the issue as a whole, that the entire world is speaking about the outcomes and the repercussions. And last year, exactly on this panel, I said that we have a real problem, that this group is taking over the country. And this hostile takeover of the country has led to them actually following the Revolutionary Guard of Iran. So we need to tackle this main issue. This main issue is that this group needs to be removed, and we need to reinstate our power over the Yemeni state. There was a narrative that we have heard for 10 years, since 2015, in the international community, that this group could be a political faction, could be a partner, you can have a dialogue with them. And we have led this endeavor for 10 years. We have wasted so much time. And we see more and more Iranian investments in this group. And this is not only damaging the Yemeni people, but also the entire region and the world. So what are we waiting for? I think that Iran today is giving all its power to Houthi. Hezbollah has ended. Hamas has entered a ceasefire. And Iran is focusing its power now to support the Houthi. So the world, we implore you, do not wait again, because they will get stronger, they will get more weapons, and they will get more means from Iran. And today, the Houthis know that they are actually the new axis of resistance, and that they have the inheritance and legacy of Hassan Nasrallah. And this is a true problem as well. And what are the means that we can maybe implement in order to recover our country, in order to take back the country, in order to have peace in our region and in the world? This is the main issue. The Yemeni people and the region and the world are facing this problem. We need a common strategy in order to tackle this group, in order to get rid of this group, actually. And I think this will lead to stability, and this will lead to peace. And I think the minor details are things that we have been talking about for 10 years, but they lead to nothing. We need this year and today to speak about the main problem. The main problem is that a terrorist group backed by the Iranian regime, by the pariah state of Iran, has taken over the country and the region. And as I said, there was also the Operation Inherent Resolve under the auspices of Saudi Arabia that started in 2015, and that had led to us gaining back much more of the territory. So I think this is the issue that we need to tackle today, and together with the international community, in order to take back our country, Yemen, and to have support for the Yemeni government.
States specifically do when it comes to Iran?
Regarding Iran, years ago, we used to say to the Americans, the Houthis are a small group in 2003, 2004, and we told the Americans back then that they are backed by Iran. And our American friends would say, no, there is no evidence for that. There's no evidence for this link. And this has been going on for years after that. And they kept saying, no, there is no evidence that they both are linked in any way. And then one of from the American administration, a high-ranking person in 2009, 2010, I gave him a dossier and told him this is the proof that the Houthi are having backup from Iran. And I think that was the file or dossier number 20 that we have handed over and still is deemed as insufficient. And he said, don't be bothered by that. And I said, how so? And he answered by saying, we know that Iran has planted this group there. But the problem is Iran. So today we still have this problem. Iran is the problem. And the world today needs to go into that direction. We need to take back the Yemeni country and peace and freedom and stability for the region and the world.
Specifically.
These issues need a lengthy conversation, and we are looking into different alternatives and scenarios for this, but we do believe that since 1979, this Iranian regime has been producing problems for the region and for the world. So we need to stop this, and we need to stop this destruction that has taken over the world and the region from 1979 up until now. We have paid a very high price in Yemen. We have more than 5 million internally displaced persons. We have 1.5 million people who are displaced outside of Yemen. We have them in the Gulf, in Egypt, in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And this ongoing of this terrorist act and of this violence need to stop. And we really hope to see prosperity, of course, and stability for our entire region.
From a European perspective, just walk me through, if you will, the steps that you see that should be taken with regards to Iran.
I think what we've heard, and I'm again not the one on Iran, so allow me also to take this back on what we see on the other side of the shore, because it's not just an Iran problem. But I think what we've heard now, from you, President, but also from the entire region. Yes, we need to listen to the region. Yes, we need to work together. Of course, it needs a military response, but of course, it also needs a political solution. I think this is where, right now, the question is much more who is taking responsibility collectively, coming back to this question of a collective security architecture and who is taking these responsibilities. We've heard, of course, about, the missions and operations in the Red Sea from everyone sitting here, but how can that be reflected also in in a much stronger political move and push? Because if it's
the policy response, because you have to have one.
Absolutely, and I don't see that we have a united policy response at the moment. Surely not one that connects the two shores of the Red Sea. And again, to me, this is, it's coming back. Even if there's a solution to Yemen, this also needs a solution to Somalia. I mean, we've been investing in Somalia for 17 years, and we have not reached, the goal of diminishing the threat of Al-Shabaab or Daesh. But I think this is really where these countries, we all together, need to come to a policy decision and then not just operational steps, but long-term steps. Because even if you could, let's say, by kinetics, diminish, that's not the end of the story. Of course, the mobilization will continue. We see that in Somalia. Whenever you liberate a town from Al-Shabaab, you will get more and more young people, mainly young men, mobilized. So it also takes much more than just the kinetics. And I think this is where we need to get better in coordinating and cooperating. Yes, listening to the region, but of course also then the region needs to be taking this responsibility further diplomatically, politically, and militarily.
Senator, in my previous iteration of 15 years working on logistics and energy at CNBC, obviously I spent a lot of time talking to those involved in global shipping. The people that have done well out of this, obviously, are the insurers. But at the end of the day, there are problems when you have a giant waterway shut off to global shipping. In your mind, what needs to be the response on this one? Because, I mean, I see a lot of people in this room that are representative of the naval side of things. Do you believe that under this president, our Navy has a better shot at restoring freedom of the seas?
I absolutely do, Hadley. I think that there will be a much more aggressive posture in making sure that the strait is opened up and that trade vessels, naval vessels,
because we're talking billions, trillions.
Yes, can use the Suez Canal. And this is a great repercussion to Egypt. Their revenue has decreased significantly. For shipping companies to go around the Cape of Good Hope, it's an extra $1 million of only fuel costs and 10 days additional transit time. So there's great cost to having the Red Sea closed, the Strait closed. So I do think we can take a much more aggressive posture. And I think what we saw in the previous administration was just a lack of willingness to even draw a red line. I mean, there was no red line drawn. I mean, it was just simply complacency.
To my knowledge, the ships were literally told, we're not going to escort you, so do this at your own risk.
Exactly. That's not okay. That's not okay. So this president it's much more aggressive. We have seen Americans die under the targeting of the Houthis. We've seen our friends, the Emiratis, die under the targeting of the Houthis. Many others, no repercussions. This president will act. And to ensure safe passage of vessels through the Red Sea, through Bab el-Mandeb is really important. So we hope to return back to some level of normalcy. But you're right. There are those that have simply refused to transit through there because of the threat to them. Mm-hmm. And that's not good for prosperity of many of these nations.
The bigger question, of course, is the humanitarian impact that all of these issues have raised over the last several years, over the last 20 years, really. And they have been catastrophic for the Yemeni people. Mr. President, how do you make the balance here between taking out the Houthis in whatever form that is going to take and the humanitarian crisis facing Yemen?
The humanitarian crisis is, of course, or goes back to the Houthis taking over the state's institutions and taking over the power. And I do think that the Stockholm Treaty, that the international community has imposed upon the Yemeni government with the Houthis, this agreement or accord for the international community was designed to address the humanitarian issues. And when the armed forces had approached the Hodeidah port, which was vital for the survival of the Houthis, the government was 3 kilometers away from the port. And the international community raised the alarms and forced the government to stop fighting and imposed, as I said, once more the Stockholm Treaty. So asking the international community now, looking at this context and looking at the humanitarian crisis back then and the humanitarian crisis today. The humanitarian crisis and humanitarian situation today is much worse than compared to back then, when the government was about to take over the port and to stop the shipping of the Iranian means and resources and weapons to the Houthis. And of course, the Houthis did not respect this accord. And I think that the UN has raised 40 billion in Hodeidah in order to pay the salaries of the state servants. I think it has been 9 years since they have received any payments from the Houthis. After 6 months, these funds were confiscated, and the accord was once again completely ignored. And they took over the territory that they have abandoned before, and I think that the humanitarian situation and crisis will keep escalating as long as we have the Houthis in power. And I think humanitarian work, as any other work, I think, as it was for the Syrians as well, was the humanitarian situation in Syria better? Was it good? There are 15 million people who ran away from the Assad regime. They're outside of Syria, and after that regime has collapsed, they can return, and they are back now in Syria. So once again, in order to tackle the humanitarian situation, in order for us to do anything, we need to take back the institutions of the state, and we need to be able to give services to the people.
How much of this has to do with the situation in Israel? Because it's what the Houthis claim is their reasoning behind attacking global shipping. In your mind, if the situation in Gaza is resolved tomorrow, do the attacks on shipping stop?
I think that this is silly. It is something that the Houthis have been planning for a long time, and Iran has been investing in the Houthis the entire time in order to take over Bab al-Mandab and the Red Sea. And when they took over Sana'a in September 2014, they went directly to Hodeidah and took it over as well. And they went to Bab al-Mandab and took it over as well. And then to Aden after a few months. This was a plan, and this was a fully forged plan from Iran in order to control this region, in order to control these maritime pathways. And this was an Iranian project that had been implemented fully with Qasem Soleimani, with Hassan Nasrallah, and of course the Bashar al-Assad regime. I think after the fall of the Assad regime, we were the first country to congratulate the Syrian people for getting rid of the Iranian hegemony. We were the first to say so. Many said, just wait and to see what the new regime is saying, what was going to happen. We said the regime of Bashar al-Assad was hosting the Houthis in Syria without visas even, without restrictions, and would give them national IDs, and they can go to the South Dahiya to train, and to Iran to train, and come back to our country to carry out terrorist attacks, to torture people in prisons, and even to take hostage the people who are employed for the international organizations. And in Saada, one of these hostages died under torture in prison from the Houthis. And how can we let the matter escalate to this point? It escalated to this point because the international community was looking away from the suffering of the people of Yemen for 10 years. And since they have been looking away for all of these years, the suffering is coming to Europe, is coming to the employees of the UN, is coming to the employees of the international organizations. I think when we retake the state institutions, this is the only way to go. This is the most efficient way to go forward.
Just for a moment, because when we talk about stabilizing a situation, the Russians have, like them or not, been helpful in certain areas of the world. For example, to the Jordanians when we talk about the drug trade and the smuggling along the border there with Syria. In fact, when the Ukraine-Russia war started, I had the chance to sit down with the leadership in Jordan, and that was one of their greatest concerns, simply that the resources that they had come to depend on in terms of that drug smuggling would be taken away and used on the front lines with Ukraine. In your mind, is it possible that Russia could actually be a stabilizing force?
If I'm looking at the situation, for example, right now in Sudan, 12 million internally displaced, the humanitarian situation in Somalia, where basically our Operation Atalanta has a mandate to accompany WFP ships. And looking at the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine as a source of having much more difficulties to get grain into, the humanitarian pipeline into the countries on the Horn of Africa side, I would clearly say no. Quite the opposite. I mean, we see this to become much more difficult right now because we don't have the grain, and now with the Houthi attacks, it's getting even more complicated. And I mean, looking at the gravity and looking at the scope of need, 12 million internally displaced, 25% of the Sudanese are now going hungry. So, I mean, we need volume and volume, and this is not, absolutely Russia is not helping. Russia is benefiting from the gold trade on both sides in, both parties in Sudan. So it's not really stabilizing or helping to bring a solution. They have not proposed any solution, not on Somalia, not on Sudan, on none of the conflicts in the Horn of Africa, but really escalating the problem, the humanitarian problem.
Do you think this would be part of the conversation that inevitably we think Russian President Vladimir Putin will have with Donald Trump? Should this be part of that conversation?
I think everything should be on the table.
Yeah. In your mind, where does this leave us, Senator Ernst?
Well, I tell you, it is going to be everything on the table with this president. I don't think he will take anything off when it comes to our interests. And of course, our interests are shared by many other countries as well. So I do think that the Houthis, we will need to figure out a way to control them in the Red Sea, but then also, again, it all leads back to Iran. And if we truly want to make a difference, we have to choke out Iran and their everlasting supply of munitions and money to these terrorist organizations, the Houthis, Hezbollah, Hamas, and others. So, again, everything will be on the table with President Trump, and I'm grateful for that. He is a man of action. Let there be no doubt about it out there, that if he throws down a line, if that line is crossed, there will be repercussions. We have seen that in the past. That is his pattern. So I don't know that this will be easily solved. We will start with soft power, of course, so whether it's greater enforcement of sanctions against Iran, we can be hopeful there. Things like Operation Guardian Prosperity, that's another way, but if it comes to being more forceful and protecting our interests and our lives, then the president will be willing to do that.
We've seen the president reach out already to Vladimir Putin. Do you believe that he's going to reach out to Iran similarly?
It is quite possible that he could, and the president makes no bones about it. If there are conversations to be had, he is going to have those conversations. So he does not make apology for that, and he shouldn't. He is a wheeler and dealer. We all know that. We've lived through the first administration. And I think that through those conversations, we may be able to find solutions. So I would say, don't cut the president off. Allow him to have those conversations. If it comes about with real positive change for the United States and our partners, then I say go for it, Mr. President. But again, I think we will see a much different administration compared to the President Joe Biden administration. I do think that we will see results in this administration over the course of the next 4 years.
Special Representative, does that make you feel reassured?
That's too short of a question, I would say, because of course what would reassure me is if we would find a collective solution led by the governments in the region. As I said before, I think this cannot go without the governments in the region. They need to be in the lead. They need to take also responsibility. I think we need to work this together. Quick deals, I'm afraid, will not cut it.
Mr. President.
May I interject there too? I also believe that. I think it should be led by the countries in the region. The problem is if that were true and if they were willing to step up without American leadership, it would have been done by now. So I think we do have to have outside shapers and influencers, and we see that now.
Mr. President, we'll end with you, sir. Do you feel better now that Donald Trump is in the White House?
I'm a man with a cause and a man with a problem. And who will help me solve this problem? I will be having a better feeling when whoever is in power who will help me and stand by my side. We need now to combat this foreign terrorist organization. And because what this organization or what this group is doing today to the Yemeni people, and what it has been doing to the Yemeni people, what it's going to do to the Yemeni people is terroristic acts. And I think this supersedes what Daesh or Al-Qaeda has done up until now. And they are still having support. They are still having more weapons delivered. And they managed to free all of the Al-Qaeda fighters in Yemen and gave them funds and gave them weapons in order to carry out their terroristic attacks elsewhere, and including, of course, supporting the terrorist groups in the Horn of Africa with weapons, with funds. And we see the issue here. We see this export of terrorism. We see this export of weapons to Africa as well. This is a true threat. I think maybe the Iranian Revolutionary Guard is the one supervising all of these movements. And going back to Iran, Iran is looking forward to replace its power and influence in Syria and maybe in Iraq with more influence in Yemen and Africa. True. Yes.
President, ladies, thank you so much.
Shukran.